He is the cold ash. She is the living spark. When trust is sharper than a knife and a touch burns like a curse, enemies must bleed as one. Only together can ice and fire break the dark. The air in the safe house tasted of salt and old dust, a grim combination that settled in the back of the throat like a premonition. It was a cliffside structure, abandoned by muggles decades ago, now repurposed as a holding cell for the Order of the Phoenix's most volatile asset. Outside, the Atlantic crashed against the jagged rocks with a rhythmic, violent thud that reverberated through the stone floors, a heartbeat for a dying war. Hermione Granger stood before the iron-reinforced oak door, her hand hovering inches from the handle. Her fingers trembled, a microscopic tremor she would have denied if anyone had been there to witness it. But the corridor was empty, save for the flickering shadows cast by a single dying torch in the sconce. She wasn't afraid of him. She told herself this with the clinical detachment she had perfected over the last 3 years of fighting. She was afraid of what he represented: desperation. The Order was bleeding out, losing members by the week, their safe houses compromised, their hope eroding like the cliffs outside. And now, their survival hinged on the treacherous memory of a boy who had spent his adolescence tormenting her. Draco Malfoy, defector, traitor, prisoner. She took a breath, holding it until her lungs burned, then exhaled the anxiety. She pushed the door open. The room was small, damp, and lit only by a high barred window that let in the grey, bruised light of the storm. He was sitting on the edge of the narrow cot, his back to the wall, one leg drawn up, his arm resting casually on his knee. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't need to. The shift in the room's pressure was enough. "Granger," he said. His voice was rough, unused, stripped of the polished drawl she remembered from the halls of Hogwarts. It sounded like gravel crunching under a boot. They finally sent the brains. Hermione closed the door behind her, sealing them in. She cast a silent muffliato and a locking charm, the movements sharp and practiced. Only then did she turn to face him. He looked ruined. That was the only word for it. The pristine, pointed arrogance of the Malfoy heir had been eroded. His platinum hair was longer, falling messily over his forehead, dull and unkempt. His shirt, once a fine silk, was stained and torn at the collar, revealing the sharp line of a collarbone and skin so pale it looked translucent. But it was his eyes that stopped her. When he finally lifted his head, those grey irises were storms in their own right, exhausted, haunted, but burning with a cold, terrifying intelligence. "Malfoy," she replied, her voice steady, though her pulse hammered against her ribs. She pulled out the wooden chair from the corner and sat opposite him, maintaining a safe distance. "Kingsley tells me you're refusing to speak to the interrogators." "Interrogators," he scoffed, a ghost of a smirk touching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "You mean the bumbling idiots who think shouting and banging on the table will make me spill the Dark Lord's secrets? Please, I've endured legilimency from Voldemort himself. Do you really think Shacklebolt's tough guy act impresses me? So, you asked for me." "I asked for competence," he corrected, his gaze travelling over her. It wasn't a lecherous look, but a measuring one. He was assessing her like a weapon he might need to wield. "And frankly, Granger, in this pit of Gryffindor heroism and stupidity, you are the only one capable of understanding the arithmancy required to open the keep." Hermione stiffened. "The Obsidian Keep. You claim to know its location. I don't claim. I know. He leaned forward slightly, the shadows shifting across his face, carving hollows under his cheekbones. And I know that without me, you'll never get past the wards. And without you, well, I suppose I'll rot here until the Dark Lord finds me and flays the skin from my bones for my betrayal. A mutually beneficial arrangement, wouldn't you say? There is nothing beneficial about working with a Death Eater. Hermione snapped, the venom slipping out before she could check it. Draco flinched. It was subtle, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of the eyelids. But she saw it. He looked down at his left forearm, covered by the sleeve of his shirt. He rubbed the fabric with his thumb, a nervous, unconscious tick. "Ex-Death Eater," he murmured, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to blend with the sound of the rain lashing against the window. "If I were still one of them, Granger, you'd already be dead. I could have killed you the moment you walked in. You didn't check for wandless magic." "I did," she lied, though a cold shiver traced her spine. "The room is suppressed." "Magic finds a way," he said softly, looking her dead in the eye. "Dark magic, especially. It lives in the blood. It doesn't need a wand." The silence that stretched between them was thick, charged with the static of unspoken history. Years of insults, of mudblood, of hexes in corridors, of standing on opposite sides of a divide that had now cracked the world open. And yet, here they were, two pieces of wreckage washing up on the same shore. Hermione opened the folder she had brought with her, laying a piece of parchment on the small table between them. It was a map of the Scottish Highlands, riddled with magical signatures. "Show me," she commanded. "Show me where it is." Draco didn't move. He stared at her hand on the parchment. "I'm not a dog, Granger. I don't perform tricks for treats." "We don't have treats, Malfoy. We have your life. The Order is debating whether you're worth the risk. Some think it would be safer to just hand you over to the Dementors and be done with it." He laughed then, a dry, brittle sound. "Let them. It would be quieter than the noise in my head." Hermione felt a sudden, unexpected pang of pity, which she immediately crushed. Pity was dangerous. Pity was a weakness he would exploit. "The keep," she repeated, harder this time. "What is inside it? A Horcrux?" "No," he answered his own question, seeing the flicker in her eyes. "Not a soul shard. Something older, a kinetic amplifier. It was created by my ancestor Armand Malfoy. It can shatter wards, even the ones around Hogwarts, even the ones around him." Hermione's breath hitched. A ward breaker. If Voldemort had made himself invincible, this could be the only way to make him mortal again. "Why give it to us?" she asked, her voice softening, searching for the lie. "Why betray your family? Your blood?" Draco looked away, staring at the damp stone wall. For a long moment, the only sound was the storm outside. When he spoke, his voice was devoid of the sneer, devoid of the mask. It was just a young man, tired and broken. "Because he is burning the world," Draco said simply, "and my mother is in the middle of the fire." He turned back to her, and the intensity of his gaze pinned her to the chair. "I don't care about your order. I don't care about your precious Potter or the greater good. I want to get my mother out. That is the price, Granger. You help me retrieve the amplifier, you use it to kill him, and you ensure my mother's safety. That is the vow." Hermione studied him. She looked for the deceit, the trap. but she found only a desperate, raw honesty that terrified her more than his malice ever had. He was telling the truth. He had nothing left to lose. "I can't authorize that," she said quietly. "You can," he countered, leaning closer. The smell of him, rain, expensive soap that had long faded, and the metallic tang of fear wafted toward her. "You're the only one they listen to. Potter is the figurehead, Weasley is the heart, but you are the spine. If you say we go, we go." Hermione looked at his hands. His fingers were long, elegant, and currently clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. She remembered those hands casting curses at her friends. She remembered them clutching a broomstick. Now they looked like they were holding onto sanity by a thread. "If I agree," Hermione began, measuring her words, "if I convince Kingsley to let me be your handler, you do exactly what I say. You do not step out of line. You do not breathe without my permission. One slip, Malfoy, and I will personally stun you and leave you for the Snatchers." Draco's lips curved into a smile that was terrifyingly genuine. It was a smile of relief, sharp and jagged. "I wouldn't expect anything less. Mud." He stopped himself. The slur hung in the air, a phantom limb he had almost leaned on. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Granger." The correction was loud in the small room. It felt like a stone dropping into a deep well. Hermione stood up, her knees slightly weak. She gathered the folder, her heart racing with the magnitude of what she was about to do. She was going to unleash Draco Malfoy from his cage. She was going to tie her fate to his. "We leave at dawn," she said, her voice ringing with a false authority she hoped he couldn't detect. "Pack your... well, be ready." She turned to the door, unlocking the wards. "Granger." She paused, hand on the iron latch, not looking back. "What?" "Don't die," he said. His voice was low, vibrating through the damp air. "I wasn't lying. You're the only thing standing between me and the abyss." Hermione gripped the cold metal handle. The tension in the room was palpable, a magnetic pull between two opposing poles forced into the same orbit. She could feel his eyes on her back, burning, dissecting, waiting. "Get some sleep, Malfoy," she whispered, and stepped out into the corridor. As the heavy door clanged shut, locking him back into the dark, Hermione leaned against the rough stone wall of the hallway. She slid down until she was crouching, her head in her hands. The adrenaline crashed over her. She had looked into the eyes of the enemy, and for the first time in years, she hadn't seen a monster. She had seen a reflection of her own terror, and that frightened her more than anything else. Outside, the thunder rolled, a promise of the storm to come. Not just the weather, but the chaos they were about to walk into together. Together. The word tasted like ash. The courtyard of the safe house was drowning in the pre-dawn grey, a time of day that felt less like a beginning and more like the holding of a breath. Mist curled around the ankles of the order members gathered by the gate, thick and cloying, smelling of wet earth and the metallic tang of anxiety. Hermione stood apart from them, her beaded bag heavy at her hip, the weight of it pulling at her posture just as the decision she had made pulled at her conscience. Harry and Ron were arguing with Kingsley in hushed, furious whispers near the perimeter wards. But Hermione didn't need to hear the words to know the cadence of their fear. She could see it in the rigid line of Ron's shoulders, in the way Harry's hand kept drifting to his wand holster. They were terrified for her. They were angry at her. And worse, they looked at her as if she were already a ghost. "You don't have to do this, Hermione." She turned. Remus Lupin stood there, his face scarred and weary, looking older than she had ever seen him. He held a long, thin object wrapped in dark velvet. "It's the only way, Remus," she said, her voice sounding too loud in the muffled quiet of the morning. "The arithmetic doesn't lie. The probability of breaking the keep's wards without a blood key is 0. We're losing. If I don't go, we're just waiting to die." Remus sighed, a sound like dry leaves scraping pavement. He held out the velvet bundle. His wand, hawthorn and unicorn hair. We've placed a trace on it, obviously. "If he casts anything unforgivable or anything directed at you with malicious intent, the core will implode. It will take his hand with it." Hermione took the wand. It felt cold, dormant, like a snake in hibernation. "Does he know that?" "He will," Remus said grimly. "Be careful, Hermione. A cornered animal is dangerous, but a cornered Malfoy is spiteful. He will try to get under your skin because it's the only territory he has left to conquer." The heavy oak door of the safe house creaked open. 2 Aurors marched Draco out. He was blinking against the dull light, his hands bound in shimmering magical cuffs that hummed with a low, threatening voltage. He had been allowed to wash, and he wore fresh clothes, black trousers and a heavy woolen jumper that swallowed his frame. But he still looked like a sketch of a person, sharp lines and smudged shadows. As he was shoved toward her, he stumbled, catching his balance with a grace that even the shackles couldn't completely suppress. He straightened, shaking his hair out of his eyes, and sneered at the assembly of heroes glaring at him. "Quite the send-off," he drawled, his voice raspy, but laced with that familiar poisonous silk. "I'd expect flowers, but I suppose the glares will have to do." Ron surged forward, his face flushed. "You shut your mouth, Malfoy, or I'll—" "Ron, stop!" Hermione cut in. Her voice was sharp, a whip crack that silenced the yard. She stepped between them, turning her back on her friends to face her charge. She needed to establish the hierarchy now, before they even left the wards. She looked at Draco. He was taller than her, she remembered that, but up close the difference felt imposing. He smelled of rain and cheap soap, a scent that shouldn't have been unsettling, yet it made the hair on her arms rise. "Hold out your hands," she commanded. Draco's eyes flickered to hers, grey ice meeting warm honey. For a second he hesitated, a flash of genuine defiance crossing his face. Then, slowly, mockingly, he raised his bound wrists. Hermione drew her wand. Finite. The magical cuffs dissolved into smoke. Draco gasped, a sharp intake of air, and immediately rubbed his wrists. The skin there was red, raw from the friction of the magic. He didn't say thank you. He just flexed his long fingers, watching the movement with a mesmerizing intensity, as if checking they were still his. "Here," she said, extending the velvet-wrapped bundle. Draco froze. He stared at the bundle as if it were a bomb. Then, with a trembling hand, he reached out. His fingers brushed hers, cold, dry skin against her warmth, and a jolt of static electricity snapped between them. They both flinched, pulling back instinctively, but he had the wand. He unwrapped it. The moment his fingers closed around the hawthorn wood, the change was instantaneous. It was terrifying. His spine straightened, his chin lifted, and a flush of colour returned to his pale cheeks. It was as if he had been holding his breath for months and finally exhaled. The wand wasn't just a tool for him, it was a limb. It was his identity. "Remember the terms, Malfoy," Hermione warned, her hand tightening on her own vinewood wand. "One curse, and you lose the hand." "I heard the wolf," Draco murmured, sliding the wand into his pocket without breaking eye contact. "I value my limbs, Granger, almost as much as I value my life. Let's go." She didn't want to say goodbye to Harry and Ron. She couldn't bear the pity in their eyes. She grabbed Draco's upper arm. The muscle was tense, hard as stone beneath the wool, and turned on her heel. "Destination?" he asked, his voice right by her ear. "Somewhere you can't be found." The world twisted. Apparition was always unpleasant, but side-along with Draco Malfoy was a singular kind of torture. It felt like being squeezed through a tube lined with sandpaper. She could feel his magic chafing against hers, oil and water, two fundamental forces that refused to mix. He felt cold, jagged, his magical signature tasting of metal and winter air. They slammed into the ground hard. Hermione landed in a crouch, wand instantly up and scanning the perimeter. Draco was less graceful. He stumbled, falling to one knee in the damp leaf litter, coughing. They were in a dense forest, the canopy so thick it blocked out the morning sky, leaving them in a perpetual twilight. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and decay. It was the forest of Dean, but miles from where she had camped with Harry and Ron. This part of the woods was older, darker. "Charming," Draco spat, wiping mud from his trousers as he stood up. He looked around with undisguised disdain. "I assume the 5-star accommodation is invisible?" "We're camping, Malfoy. Keep up." Hermione ignored his sneer, moving quickly to establish the wards. She needed to keep moving. If she stopped, the reality of her situation, alone in the woods with a Death Eater, would catch up to her. She began casting the protective enchantments: Salvio Hexia, Muggle Repelling Charm, Cave Inimicum. Her movements were fluid, precise. She could feel Draco watching her. He wasn't helping. He was leaning against a mossy oak tree, arms crossed, dissecting her spellwork. "Your wand movement on the Protego Totalum is sloppy," he commented idly. "You're overcompensating on the wrist flick. It wastes energy." Hermione spun around, her patience fraying. "If you think you can do better, be my guest." "Oh, wait. You can't. Because if you cast a spell that powerful, the Order will know exactly where we are." "Touché." He smirked, but his eyes tracked the tip of her wand with a hunger that made her stomach turn. He wanted to cast. He was itching for it. "So, I am the compass, and you are the muscle. How domestic." "I am the warden," she corrected, finishing the last ward. The air shimmered, settling into a heavy stillness as the protective dome sealed them in. "And you are the prisoner on parole. Don't forget it." She set up the tent, the small, battered canvas one she had used for years. It looked pathetic against the towering trees. When she motioned for him to enter, he looked at the flap as if it were the mouth of a beast. "Ladies first," he said, gesturing with exaggerated politeness. Inside, the tent was cramped. It had 2 cots separated by a narrow aisle, a small table, and a magical stove. It smelled of old tea and canvas. Hermione busied herself with unpacking, trying to create noise to fill the suffocating silence. Draco stood in the center of the space, looking out of place. He was too tall, too sharp, too Malfoy for this worn-out rebellion aesthetic. He ran a finger along the edge of the table, checking for dust. "So," he said, his voice dropping, losing the mockery. "This is it. Just you and me. For how long?" "Until we find the keep, or until we die." Hermione placed a kettle on the stove, tapping it with her wand to boil the water. She turned to face him. The space was so small they were barely 3 feet apart. She could see the faint scars on his neck, the dark circles under his eyes that the shadows of the cell had hidden. "And if I decide to leave?" he asked softly. "If I decide to take my chances with the Snatchers, rather than rot in a tent with a mudblood who thinks she's a soldier?" "You won't." Hermione held his gaze. "Because you're a coward, Malfoy. You're brave enough to survive, but you're not brave enough to die alone in the woods. You need me." His jaw tightened. The insult landed, but instead of exploding, he went eerily quiet. He took a step closer, crowding her space. The air between them grew thick, charged with a sudden, volatile tension. It wasn't sexual. Not yet. It was the tension of 2 predators circling in a cage. "Careful, Granger," he whispered, looming over her. "You mistake survival instinct for cowardice. I have done things to stay alive that would make your Gryffindor stomach churn. Do not think you own me just because you hold the leash." Hermione didn't back down, though her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tilted her head up, refusing to break eye contact. "I don't want to own you, Malfoy. I just want to use you to end this war. Then you can go back to whatever hollow life you have left." For a moment, she thought he might strike her. His grey eyes swirled with a tempest of emotions, rage, shame, exhaustion. But then, the mask slid back into place. The corner of his mouth quirked up. "Tea," he said, stepping back and gesturing to the whistling kettle. "I take mine with 2 sugars, unless rations are tight." Hermione let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the teapot. "Get your own sugar," she muttered, turning away to hide the tremor. Night fell quickly in the forest. The darkness was absolute, pressing against the ward boundaries like a physical weight. Hermione sat at the small table, poring over the map Draco had marked, while he sat on his cot, polishing his wand with a piece of cloth he'd found. The silence was loud. Every rustle of fabric, every breath, every shift of weight was amplified. They were 2 enemies forced into an intimacy that was more terrifying than any duel. Hermione looked up from the map. The candlelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across Draco's face. He was focused on his wand, his expression unguarded for the first time. He looked young, painfully young, and sad. She watched his hands, long, pale fingers that caressed the wood with a reverence that spoke of deep loneliness. He looked up suddenly, catching her staring. He didn't sneer. He didn't speak. He just held her gaze across the flickering light. In that silence, the hatred that had defined them for 7 years seemed to pause, suspended in the amber glow of the lantern. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. But it was recognition. He was just a boy who was afraid of the dark, and she was the girl who had to lead him through it. "Go to sleep, Granger," he said quietly, breaking the spell. He lay back on the cot, turning his face to the wall. "I'll take the first watch. I can't sleep anyway." Hermione hesitated, Trusting him to watch over her while she slept was madness, but she was exhausted, her magic drained from the wards. "Wake me in 4 hours," she said, clutching her wand as she lay down on the opposite cot. 4 hours, he echoed. She closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. She listened to the sound of his breathing, steady, rhythmic, alive. They were alone in the dark, tethered together by desperation. And for the first time, the monster under the bed didn't feel quite so monstrous. He just felt cold. And she wondered, with a sudden, terrifying clarity, what it would take to warm him. 3 days into the wilderness, and the silence had become a third entity in the tent, occupying the space between the cot and the stove like a sullen ghost. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a library, which Hermione craved, but the heavy, loaded silence of a held breath before a scream. Hermione woke to the sound of rain drumming against the canvas, a relentless, rhythmic assault that seemed to be trying to scrub the world clean. She lay still for a moment, staring at the beige fabric above her, orienting herself. The air in the tent was damp and cold, seeping through her blankets. She turned her head. The other cot was empty. The blankets were neatly folded, the pillows smoothed out. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. She sat up, her hand flying to her wand under the pillow. Had he left? Had he broken the wards? "Relax, Granger. I haven't absconded." The voice came from the small seating area near the entrance. Draco was sitting in the canvas chair, one leg crossed over the other, a mug of steaming tea cradled in his hands. He was reading, of all things, her copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard. He looked up, his face pale in the grey morning light filtering through the flaps. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes like bruises, but there was a strange calmness to him. "You're awake," she said, her voice thick with sleep. She felt a flush of embarrassment. Her hair was likely a bird's nest, and she was wearing oversized pajamas. "Observant as always," he drawled, closing the book with a soft snap. "I made tea, Earl Grey. I assume that's acceptable, or do you prefer something more pedestrian?" Hermione blinked. "You made tea?" "I am capable of boiling water, Granger. I'm pureblood, not invalid." He gestured to the mug on the small table. "It's hot. Drink it before we leave. The map says we have a steep climb today." Hermione got out of bed, shivering as the cold air hit her skin. She pulled her dressing gown tighter around herself and moved to the table. The tea was indeed hot and perfectly brewed. It was disorienting. She was used to Draco the bully, Draco the coward, Draco the Death Eater. She didn't know what to do with Draco the tea maker. "Thank you," she muttered, wrapping her hands around the ceramic. "Don't thank me," he said, looking back at the book cover, tracing the embossed runes with a long finger. "I just need you alert. If you trip and break your neck because you're groggy, I'm stuck out here with your corpse. And you are heavy." "I am not." She stopped, catching the faint twitch of his lips. He was baiting her. It was a game, a way to normalize the insanity of their situation. "We need to move. The tracker spell indicates the magical signature of the keep is shifting. It's elusive." "It's sentient," Draco corrected. He stood up, stretching. The movement was feline, fluid and dangerous. His jumper rode up slightly, revealing a sliver of pale skin and the dark waistband of his trousers. Hermione looked away quickly, focusing on her tea. The keep moves to avoid detection. It smells intent." If we go in there thinking like soldiers, it will hide. We need to think like guests. Guests who are planning to break in and steal a family heirloom. Precisely. He met her eyes, and for a second the grey was clear, amused. My family has always had a twisted sense of hospitality. The trek was brutal. The forest floor was a sludge of decaying leaves and mud that sucked at their boots with every step. The rain had turned into a fine, freezing mist that coated everything in a sheen of ice. Hermione led the way, her wand acting as a compass, glowing with a faint blue light. Draco followed a few paces behind, silent as a shadow. They didn't speak for hours. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the snap of twigs. Hermione could feel his presence behind her, a constant pressure on her senses. She found herself hyper-aware of him, the rhythm of his stride, the occasional low curse when a branch whipped back at him. By midday, the terrain shifted. The trees grew gnarled and twisted, their roots rising out of the ground like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, dropping well below freezing, though the season didn't account for it. "Stop," Draco said sharply. Hermione froze, her boots skidding on a patch of black moss. "What is it?" "Don't move," he commanded. He walked past her, his wand drawn. He didn't look at her. His eyes were scanning the tree line, his nostrils flaring. "Can't you smell it?" "Smell what? Pine? Mud? Ozone," he whispered. "And rot. Necrotic magic." He crouched down, hovering his hand over a patch of innocent-looking ferns. The moment his shadow fell over them, the plants hissed and curled in on themselves, revealing black, thorny undersides that dripped with a viscous purple liquid. Venomous tentacular hybrid. Hermione breathed, stepping closer. But they shouldn't be indigenous to this latitude. "They aren't," Draco said grimly. "They're sentries. Someone planted them. Likely snatchers or a dark patrol trying to secure the perimeter." He stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "We're walking into a minefield, Granger. One wrong step, and those vines will strip the flesh from your bones before you can say Defindo." Hermione looked at the path ahead. Now that she knew what to look for, she saw the subtle shimmer of the trap weaving through the undergrowth. It was a labyrinth. "We have to clear a path," she said, raising her wand. "Incendio." "No!" Draco grabbed her wrist, jerking her arm down. The contact was electric. His fingers were cold, strong, clamping over her pulse point. "Are you mad? Fire will trigger the spores. You'll choke us both to death in seconds." Hermione stared at him, her heart pounding. He was close, too close. She could see the flecks of silver in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He wasn't sneering now. He was terrified. Not for himself, but for the mission. For her? "Then what do you suggest?" she hissed, trying to pull her arm back. He didn't let go immediately. His thumb brushed over the inside of her wrist, feeling the frantic beat of her heart. "Freezing charms," he said, his voice lowering to a husky register. "We freeze them dormant. Precision work. No wide area spells. Can you handle precision, or is your Gryffindor style limited to blast it and hope for the best?" "I am the best witch of my age, Malfoy," she snapped, finally yanking her hand free. The skin where he had touched her burned, a phantom heat that lingered. "Prove it." They moved forward, side by side this time. It was a dance of deadly necessity. Hermione would cast Glacius on the left, freezing a lashing vine in mid-strike, turning it into a sculpture of ice. Draco would strike on the right, his movements elegant and sharp, his wand slicing the air like a rapier. Glacius Tria, he murmured, freezing a particularly large cluster that lunged at Hermione's face. The ice crackled, snapping the vines instantly. "Nice aim," she admitted, breathless, stepping over the shattered remains. "Don't get used to it." They worked in a rhythm that shouldn't have been possible. They were enemies, opposites, fire and ice. But here, in the deadly quiet of the cursed forest, they fit. Her power was the anvil, steady and forceful. His control was the hammer, precise and shaping. They covered each other without speaking, anticipating movements, filling gaps in defense. For a brief, hallucinated hour, they weren't Draco and Hermione, the pureblood and the Muggle-born. They were just two magical cores singing in harmony against the dark. They reached the edge of the sentry patch as the sun began to dip, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. Hermione stepped onto safe ground, her knees buckling with exhaustion. She stumbled, her boot catching on a root. She braced for the impact of the cold ground, but it never came. An arm hooked around her waist, hauling her up against a solid chest. She gasped, her hands instinctively clutching at his coat to steady herself. Draco had caught her. He held her there for a beat longer than necessary. His body was warm, surprisingly solid. She could feel the rapid thud of his heart against her own chest. He smelled of sweat, magic, and the crisp scent of winter air. She looked up. His face was inches from hers. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, his cheeks flushed from the exertion. He was looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. It was intense, searching, stripped of all artifice. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the grey. "Careful, Granger," he murmured. His voice was rough, vibrating through her chest where they touched. "You're trembling." I'm fine," she stammered, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. Her legs felt like jelly, and his grip was the only thing keeping her upright. He looked at her mouth, then back up to her eyes. The air between them thickened, charged with the residual magic of their battle and something else, something dangerous and magnetic. The seesaw of their relationship tilted violently. The repulsion was gone, replaced by a terrifying raw awareness of him as a man. "You fight well," he said softly, almost as if he hadn't meant to say it aloud. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't finish that sentence." Draco hesitated. His hand tightened on her waist, his fingers digging into the fabric of her coat. He looked like he was warring with himself, a battle between a lifetime of prejudice and the undeniable reality of the woman in his arms. Slowly, deliberately, he let go. The loss of contact was a physical shock, leaving Hermione cold. He stepped back, turning his face away, the mask sliding back into place. But it was thinner now, cracked. "We should set up camp," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the earlier heat. "The temperature is dropping." Hermione nodded, unable to speak. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold onto the fading warmth. She watched him walk away to scout the perimeter, his shoulders tense. That night, the tent felt smaller than ever. They ate their rations in silence, but the silence had changed. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavy with unspoken words, with the memory of how perfectly they had moved together, and the ghost of his touch on her waist. Draco sat on his cot, cleaning his wand again. Hermione watched him from under her eyelashes. She saw the tremor in his hands, the adrenaline crash. "Malfoy," she said softly. He looked up, wary. "You saved me back there, with the vines." He shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "You had the tracker. If you died, I'd be lost." "Right," she said, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "Logic. Always," he replied. But he didn't look away. He held her gaze, and in the flickering candlelight, she saw the doubt in his eyes. He was questioning everything. And for the first time, Hermione let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, the boy who had made her life a misery was capable of becoming the man who helped save it. "Get some sleep," he said, blowing out the candle nearest to him, plunging his side of the tent into shadow. "Tomorrow we reach the river and the bridge." "Good night, Draco," she whispered. The use of his given name hung in the darkness, unauthorized and intimate. He didn't correct her. The river was not so much water as it was a scar cut deep into the earth. A roaring, frothing vein of black meltwater that thundered through the gorge with enough force to vibrate the bones of anyone standing on the bank. The mist rising from it was freezing, coating Hermione's eyelashes in tiny beads of ice within seconds. They stood at the edge of the precipice, looking down. The bridge Draco had promised was there, but it was a skeletal thing. Ropes of ancient, frayed hemp and planks of wood that looked as though a strong sneeze would disintegrate them. It swayed violently in the updraft from the chasm. "Trust me," Draco said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the water. He was shouting, but the sound was snatched away by the wind. He looked pale, his grey eyes narrowed against the spray. "It holds. It's charmed to hold weight, not look pretty. Malfoy aesthetics usually favour form over function, but my ancestors were practical when it came to escape routes." Hermione looked at the drop. It was at least 200 feet down to the jagged rocks. "It looks dead, Draco. The magic feels dormant." "It wakes with blood," he said grimly. He stepped forward, pulling a small silver knife from his boot, a frantic, muggle-ish weapon she hadn't known he possessed. Before she could protest, he sliced the palm of his left hand. "Draco!" "Don't!" he snapped, holding his bleeding hand over the rotting post of the bridge anchor. A drop of bright crimson hit the wood. The reaction was visceral. The bridge groaned, a sound like a waking beast. The ropes tightened, shedding years of rot in a ripple of silver light. The planks knit themselves back together, though they remained grey and weathered. The structure steadied, humming with a low, thrumming magic that felt distinctly dark, heavy, demanding, and cold. "It will hold for 10 minutes, he said, wrapping a handkerchief around his hand. The white linen stained red instantly. "We move now." He didn't wait for her. He stepped onto the swaying structure, his balance unnatural, born of years on a broomstick. Hermione followed, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Halfway across, the wind picked up. The bridge lurched sideways. Hermione gasped, dropping to her knees and clutching the rope railing. The wood beneath her groaned ominously. "Don't stop!" Draco yelled, turning back. The wind whipped his hair across his face, blinding him momentarily. "Granger, get up! The blood magic is fading." "I can't." Panic, irrational and suffocating, seized her. The drop below swirled, dizzying and endless. It wasn't just the height, it was the magic of the bridge. It was feeding on her fear, amplifying it. It's inside my head," Draco cursed. He scrambled back toward her, the bridge swaying sickeningly under his shifting weight. He dropped to his knees in front of her, grabbing her shoulders. His grip was bruising. "Look at me," he commanded. "Not down. Look at me." Hermione forced her eyes to his. He was terrified. She could see the dilation of his pupils, the sheen of sweat on his upper lip, but he was focused. "It's an intimidation ward," he shouted over the wind. "It shows you your death. Ignore it. You are Hermione Granger. You survived a war. You survived Bellatrix Lestrange in my drawing room. This is just wood and wind. Move!" The mention of the torture snapped her back to reality. The phantom pain in her arm flared, grounding her. She saw the desperation in his face. He wasn't leaving her. He could have run, but he was here, on his knees on a rotting bridge, waiting for her. She nodded, breathless. "Okay. On 3. 1, 2, 3. He hauled her up. They ran. They scrambled onto the muddy bank of the far side just as the silver light died. Behind them, the bridge gave a mournful creak and collapsed, the ropes snapping like thread. The wreckage plummeted silently into the mist below. They collapsed onto the wet grass, chests heaving, lungs burning with the cold air. Hermione lay on her back, staring up at the canopy of trees, rain mingling with the sweat on her face. Draco was beside her, curled on his side, clutching his bandaged hand. For a long time, neither spoke. The adrenaline crash was a physical weight, pinning them to the earth. "You waited," she whispered finally, the words scraping her throat. Draco let out a harsh breath, not quite a laugh. "I told you, Granger. I need you to open the door. You could have jumped. You came back." He sat up slowly, wincing. He didn't look at her. He began unwrapping the soaked, bloody bandage on his hand. "Don't read into it. I'm not a hero. I don't like owing debts." Hermione sat up too. She reached for his hand. "Let me see." He flinched away. "It's fine. Draco, give me your hand." Her voice was firm, the tone she used when Harry was being particularly stubborn. Reluctantly, he extended his arm. The cut was deep, slicing across his lifeline. Hermione drew her wand, murmuring a healing incantation. The skin knit together, leaving a faint, angry white line. She didn't let go immediately. Her thumb brushed over the faded dark mark on his forearm, just inches from the new scar. He went still. The air between them froze. She expected him to pull away, to sneer, to lash out. Instead, he watched her hand, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't wash off," he said quietly. "I've tried." "I know," she replied, her voice soft. "Scars don't disappear. They just stop bleeding." He looked up at her then, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. It was a look of profound loneliness, a glimpse of the boy who had been given a task he couldn't complete and a choice he couldn't make. "We need to set up camp," he said abruptly, pulling his hand back as if burned. The walls were going back up. The temperature will drop below freezing tonight. The night was harder than the day. The silence of the forest was oppressive, broken only by the crackle of the magical fire Hermione had conjured in the stove. They had eaten in silence, the earlier intimacy on the riverbank hanging between them like a ghost. Draco fell asleep first. It was a restless, twitching sleep. He lay on his back, one arm thrown over his eyes, his breathing shallow. Hermione sat at the small table, keeping watch. She was reading the map again, but the letters swam before her eyes. She kept glancing at him. He looked younger when he slept, the sharp lines of his face softened by the shadows. Around 3 a.m., the The whimpering started. It began as a low moan, a sound of distress that made the hair on Hermione's arms stand up. Then he started to thrash. No, no, please. Hermione stood up, moving to his cot. Draco, don't. Mother, don't look. He was gasping now, his head tossing from side to side on the pillow. His hands clawed at the blankets. I'll do it. I'll do it. Just don't. He was dreaming of the manor, of the tasks, of the torture. Draco, wake up, Hermione whispered, reaching out to shake his shoulder. Crucio! He screamed the curse in his sleep, his body arching off the mattress as if he were the one being hit. Hermione didn't think. She grabbed his shoulders, pinning him down. Draco! It's a dream! Wake up! His eyes flew open. They were wide, unseeing, black with terror. He scrambled backward, pushing himself into the corner of the cot, his wand instantly in his hand, pointed directly at her chest. Stay back, he snarled, his voice unrecognizable. I won't let you take her. Hermione froze, hands raised, palms open. She was staring down the barrel of a hawthorn wand, held by a boy who didn't know where he was. Draco, look at me. It's Hermione. You're in the forest. You're safe. He was panting, his chest heaving. He blinked, the fog of the nightmare slowly clearing. He looked at the tent walls, the stove, and finally at her. The wand tip lowered, shaking. Granger, he rasped. Yes. She sat on the edge of his cot, disregarding the danger. You were having a nightmare. Draco dropped the wand. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. It wasn't a sob. He was too controlled for that. But it was the shuddering of a structure that had held too much weight for too long and was finally cracking. I can't do this, he whispered into his palms. I see him every time I close my eyes. I see what I did. I see what I didn't do. Hermione moved closer. Tentatively, she placed a hand on his back. He stiffened, but he didn't push her away. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the tension in every muscle. You're not there anymore, she said softly. You're here, with me. He lowered his hands, turning his head to look at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, wet with unshed tears. And you think that's better? You think you're safe with me? I am poison, Granger. Everything I touch breaks. I'm not broken yet, she challenged gently. Draco looked at her, really looked at her, searching for the lie. He reached out, his hand trembling, and brushed a stray curl of hair from her forehead. His fingers grazed her temple, a touch so light it felt like a breath. Why? He murmured. Why aren't you afraid of me? I am, she admitted, her breath hitching. But not like that. I'm afraid for you. For a moment, the world narrowed down to the space between them. The air was thick with static. He leaned in, just an inch, his gaze dropping to her lips. It was a question, a plea. Then the fear returned. Not the nightmare, but the fear of himself. He pulled back sharply, his face closing off like a shuttered window. He grabbed his wand and stood up, putting the width of the tent between them. Go to sleep, Granger, he said, his voice cold, hard, and utterly fake. I'll take the watch. Draco. Don't, he snapped, turning his back to her. Just don't. You have no idea what you're playing with. He sat in the chair, rigid as a statue, staring at the tent flap. Hermione stayed on his cot for a moment, looking at his back. The rejection stung, sharp and immediate. But beneath the sting, she felt a profound ache for him. He was drowning, and he was terrified that if she tried to save him, he would only pull her down with him. She went back to her own bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin. The tent was silent again, but the atmosphere had shifted. The animosity was gone, replaced by a raw, bleeding wound of shared trauma. They were no longer enemies. They were two people who had seen each other's darkest corners. And once you see the dark in someone, you can never look at them the same way again. Draco didn't sleep again that night. Hermione watched him from the shadows, his silhouette stark against the canvas. He looked like a sentry guarding a treasure he was convinced he didn't deserve. The seesaw had swung. They had touched the sun, trust, intimacy, almost a kiss, and he had thrown them back into the cold to protect her. But the warmth was still there, lingering on her skin where he had touched her, and she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that this wasn't over. It was just beginning. The rain had turned to sleet, sharp little needles of ice that stung the skin and rattled against the hood of Hermione's cloak like a handful of gravel thrown by an angry ghost. They had been walking for 2 days since the bridge incident, moving deeper into the wild, magical dead zone of the Highlands, where apparition was impossible due to the ancient ley lines interfering with spatial magic. Hermione's boots were soaked through. Every step was a squelch of misery. Beside her, Draco moved with a mechanical, jerky rhythm. He had stopped complaining miles ago, which worried her more than his insults ever could. Silence, for Draco Malfoy, was not a sign of contemplation. It was a sign of shutting down. "There," he rasped, pointing a gloved hand toward a ridge of granite. Nestled in the crook of the rock face was a stone structure, too small to be a house, too large to be a shed, a bothy. It looked abandoned, the roof sagging under the weight of wet moss, the door hanging off one hinge. To Hermione, it looked like a palace. "Shelter," she breathed, the words steaming in the freezing air. They stumbled inside. The interior was dry, smelling of peat ash and old sheep wool. Hermione immediately set to work, her wand a blur of motion. Reparo on the door, Scourgify on the stone floor, Incendio in the hearth. Within minutes, a fire was roaring, casting long, dancing shadows against the rough stone walls. The warmth hit them like a physical blow, thawing the numbness in their fingers and toes until it burned. Hermione turned to Draco. He was standing by the small, grimy window, staring out at the storm. He hadn't taken off his cloak. He was shivering, violent, full-body tremors that he was fighting to suppress. "Draco." She took a step toward him. "You need to get dry. Take off the wet clothes." He didn't turn. "I'm fine. Just give me a minute." His voice was thin, reedy. Hermione frowned. She walked over to him and reached out, touching his shoulder. He hissed in pain, flinching away so hard he nearly slammed into the wall. "Don't touch me." Hermione froze. "What is it?" "Nothing." "It's nothing. You're lying." She moved around him, blocking his path. His face was grey, beaded with sweat despite the cold. His eyes were glassy. "Show me." "Granger, leave it." "Show me." She grabbed the front of his cloak and yanked it open. Draco stumbled back, too weak to fight her. Under the cloak, his left arm, the one he had cut on the bridge, was held tight against his chest. The sleeve of his jumper was soaked, not with rain, but with something darker, thicker. "Oh my God," Hermione whispered. "It's the price," he muttered deliriously, his eyes losing focus. Blood for the bridge. It didn't stop taking. Hermione guided him to the transfigured pallet of blankets near the fire. He collapsed onto it, his legs giving out. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she used her wand to slice open the sleeve of his jumper. The smell of ozone and rotting meat filled the small room. The cut on his palm hadn't healed. The black magic of the bridge had infected the wound, sending dark, spiderweb veins crawling up his wrist, past the faded dark mark, reaching toward his elbow. The skin was burning hot to the touch. Necrotic curse, she diagnosed, her mind racing through textbooks, searching for a countercurse. Why didn't you tell me? This could take your arm, Draco. Didn't want to. Slow us down, he gritted out, his head lolling back against the makeshift pillow. You would have stopped. We have to. Reach the keep. You idiot, she said, her voice cracking. You absolute noble idiot. She dug into her beaded bag, pulling out vials of dittany, essence of myrtlap, and a rare silver flask of phoenix tears she had been saving for an emergency. This was it. This is going to hurt, she warned him, uncorking the dittany. Draco let out a dry, humorless laugh. Add it to the list. She poured the potion. He screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound that tore through the small bothy and settled in Hermione's bones. He arched his back, his right hand gripping her shoulder with bruising force, digging his fingers into her flesh to anchor himself against the agony. Hermione didn't flinch. She held his wrist steady, murmuring a stream of healing spells, weaving her magic into his, fighting the darkness in his veins. For an hour, they existed in a bubble of pain and magic. Hermione poured every ounce of her will into saving his hand. She wiped the sweat from his forehead with her sleeve. She whispered reassurances she wasn't sure were true. Finally, the black veins receded. The angry red of the infection faded to a dull pink. Draco went limp, his breathing ragged, his body slick with sweat. Hermione sat back on her heels, exhausted. Her magic felt depleted, a hollow ache in her chest. She looked at him. He was asleep or unconscious, his face turned toward the firelight. He looked broken, beautiful, but broken. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the dark mark on his forearm. It was stark against his pale skin, a brand of ownership, and next to it, the fresh scar from the bridge, a brand of sacrifice. 2 choices, 2 lives. Who are you, Draco Malfoy? She whispered to the sleeping boy. She stayed awake, watching him. Around midnight, the storm outside quieted to a sullen drizzle. The fire crackled, popping softly. Draco stirred. His eyes fluttered open. They were clearer now, the fever broken. He looked at the ceiling, then at his bandaged hand, and finally at her. You're still here, he said, his voice raspy. Where else would I be? Hermione dipped a cloth in cool water and pressed it to his forehead. He closed his eyes at the touch, leaning into her hand. The gesture was so intimate, so trusting, it made Hermione's breath hitch. You should have left me, he murmured. It would have been smarter, mathematically. I told you, she said softly, stroking the hair back from his damp temples. We're in this together. That means I carry you when you can't walk. Draco opened his eyes. He reached up with his good hand, catching her wrist. His thumb traced the pulse point, just as he had in the forest. Why do you care? After everything I did, after every name I called you. Because, Hermione said, her voice trembling, I see the person you're trying to become, and I think he's worth saving. Draco stared at her, his expression shattering. The mask was gone completely. In its place was a naked longing that terrified her. He pulled on her hand, gently, urging her closer. "Hermione," he breathed. It was the first time he had said her name. It sounded like a prayer. She leaned down. Their faces were inches apart. She could feel his breath on her lips, smell the scent of rain and healing herbs. The tension that had been building between them, from the cell to the forest to the bridge, snapped tight. "I don't deserve this," he whispered, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "I don't deserve you. Let me decide what you deserve." She closed the gap. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant. A question. Is this real? Draco let out a sound low in his throat, a noise of surrender, and deepened it. His hand tangled in her hair, pulling her down to him. His lips were chapped, fever-hot, and desperate. It wasn't the kiss of a lover. It was the kiss of a drowning man finding air. Hermione melted against him, her hands resting on his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. For a moment, the war didn't exist. Voldemort didn't exist. There was only the firelight, the smell of wood smoke, and the taste of Draco Malfoy. He pulled back slowly, resting his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed, his lashes wet. "If we survive this," he whispered, "I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." "Just survive," she said, kissing his forehead. "Sleep now." He nodded, exhausted by the emotion. He kept her hand in his, interlacing their fingers, and within minutes his breathing evened out into deep sleep. Hermione sat there, her heart full, her mind reeling. She felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But hope in war is a dangerous distraction. Around 3 a.m. the fire burned low. Hermione dozed, her head resting on her knees. A sound woke her, a soft click. She blinked, disoriented. The space where Draco had been was empty. Panic flared instantly. She scrambled up, wand in hand. The door of the bothy was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. "Draco?" she whispered. No answer. She moved to the door, peering out into the darkness. The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy, suffocating mist. About 20 yards away, near the edge of the granite ridge, she saw a silhouette. It was Draco. He was standing with his back to her, his wand raised. But he wasn't keeping watch. A silvery, vaporous shape was floating in front of him. A Patronus? No, it was too indistinct. It was a messenger spell, a dark, obscure piece of magic used by the Death Eaters for secure communication. Hermione pressed herself against the cold stone of the doorframe, her heart turning to ice. She strained to hear. The wind carried his voice, low and urgent. "Coordinates received," Draco was saying to the mist. "Yes, she trusts me. The path is open." Hermione stopped breathing. The mist swirled, taking the shape of a hooded figure. A voice, distorted and metallic, drifted back. "Bring her to the keep. The Lord is impatient. Do not fail us again, Draco." "I won't," Draco replied. His voice was steady, cold. The voice of the boy who had fixed the vanishing cabinet. "I'll bring her. Just ensure my mother is safe. The pact stands." With a flick of his wand, Draco dispelled the mist. He stood there for a moment, head bowed, staring at his hands. Then he turned to head back to the bothy. Hermione scrambled back inside, throwing herself onto her pallet and pulling the blanket up to her chin. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "She trusts me. Bring her to the keep. The Lord is impatient." The words echoed in her mind, shattering the warmth of the kiss, turning the memory of his touch into something violating. He wasn't saving her. He was delivering her. She heard the door creak open. Soft footsteps approached. She felt his presence looming over her. "Hermione," he whispered. She didn't move. She forced her breathing to be slow and even, feigning sleep. He stood there for a long time. She felt him brush a stray hair from her cheek. His touch, which hours ago had felt like salvation, now felt like a brand. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the dark. He moved away, settling back onto his own pallet. Hermione lay in the darkness, staring at the stone wall. A single tear leaked from her eye and tracked hot across her temple into her hair. She didn't wipe it away. She clamped her hand around her wand under the blanket, gripping it until her knuckles turned white. The seesaw had swung again, violently, crashing into the ground. The warmth was gone. The cold was back. And this time, it was freezing. She would go to the keep. She would open the door. But she wouldn't be the victim he expected. If Draco Malfoy wanted a war, she would give him one. The morning light did not break. It merely bruised the sky, turning the horizon into a smudge of purple and charcoal. Inside the stone bothy, the fire had died hours ago, leaving behind a pile of cold grey ash that mirrored the desolate landscape of Hermione's chest. She was already awake when Draco stirred. She sat on the edge of her pallet, her boots laced tight, her cloak fastened to her chin, her wand gripped so hard in her hand that her knuckles were white peaks. She watched him sleep for a moment, a dangerous indulgence. In repose, he still looked like the boy who had kissed her with desperate, feverish need the night before. But now she saw the lie in the curve of his mouth. She saw the traitor beneath the skin. "She trusts me." The words echoed in her mind, a corrosive acid eating away at the fragile hope she had allowed herself to feel. Draco opened his eyes. For a split second, there was a softness there, a remnant of the intimacy they had shared. He pushed himself up, wincing slightly as his weight fell on his bandaged hand, and looked at her. "Morning," he rasped, his voice thick with sleep. He offered a tentative, crooked smile, the one that had made her heart stumble just hours ago. Hermione didn't smile back. She stood up, her movements sharp and economical. "We need to move. The weather is turning." Draco's smile faltered. He sat up straighter, sensing the shift in the air pressure. The warmth was gone, replaced by a wall of ice so thick he could almost see his breath against it. "Granger?" he asked, swinging his legs off the pallet. "Are you all right? You were quiet last night." "I was sleeping," she lied, her voice flat. She turned her back to him to pack the few supplies they had left. "And we are behind schedule. If your contact is right about the keep's location, we have a 3-hour climb." She emphasized the word contact with a microscopic pause, a razor-thin slice of accusation. Draco stiffened. He stood up slowly, the air in the small room suddenly suffocating. "What contact?" he asked carefully. Hermione zipped her bag shut with a harsh sound. She turned to face him, her expression a perfect, impenetrable mask of Gryffindor bravery. "The map, Malfoy. The intelligence. Whatever source gave you the coordinates. Let's just hope they didn't sell us out." She saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. Guilt. Fear. It didn't matter. She walked past him to the door, making sure their clothes didn't brush. "Let's go." The climb was brutal. The Obsidian Keep was not a castle that sat upon a hill. It was a fortress, carved into the living rock of a mountain split by a jagged fissure. The path leading to it was little more than a goat track, slick with black ice and bordered by a sheer drop into a misty abyss. They moved in silence, but where the silence of the forest had become companionable, this silence was a weapon. Hermione walked ahead, setting a punishing pace. She didn't offer him a hand over the rough patches. She didn't cast warming charms on him when the wind howled. She treated him exactly as the mission required, as a prisoner, as a key. Draco struggled behind her. His injury was clearly paining him. She could hear his ragged breathing, the occasional stumble. Every instinct in her body screamed to turn around, to help him, to heal him. But then the voice in her head would whisper, "Bring her to the Lord," and her heart would harden into stone. By noon, they reached the plateau, and there it was. The Obsidian Keep lived up to its name. It was a monstrosity of black volcanic glass, rising from the rock like a dark crystal growth. It had no windows, no visible towers. It was a geometric nightmare, sharp angles and smooth, reflective surfaces that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It hummed with a low, thrumming vibration that Hermione could feel in her teeth. It felt evil, ancient and indifferent. "The tomb of Armand Malfoy," Draco whispered, coming up beside her. He sounded breathless, his face pale against the black collar of his cloak. He stared at the structure with a mixture of reverence and revulsion. "My father brought me here once. I was 6. He told me that if I ever touched the walls, the stone would eat my magic." "Charming family history," Hermione said coldly. She scanned the smooth, seamless facade. "Where is the entrance?" "There is no door," Draco said, stepping forward. "Only a price." He walked toward a flat, polished section of the wall that looked identical to the rest. He stopped inches from the black glass. He pulled off his glove, revealing the bandage on his left hand. "It requires a sequence," he said, his voice regaining some of its authority. "Arithmancy, the golden ratio inverted, mapped against the current lunar phase. You have to calculate the pressure points." Hermione stepped up beside him. She looked at the wall. Faint, ghostly runes shimmered deep within the obsidian, shifting like fish under ice. She recognized the pattern immediately. It was complex, brilliant, and deadly. "It's a kinetic cipher," she murmured, her mind automatically engaging with the puzzle. "If you press the wrong vector, the wall implodes." "Correct." Draco glanced at her. "I can provide the blood, Granger, but my head is foggy. The fever. If I miscalculate, we're flattened." "I'll do the math," she said. She didn't look at him. "Give me the knife." "No." He shook his head. "I have to do it. The wall needs Malfoy blood. Just tell me where to press." Hermione nodded. She focused on the shifting runes, calculating the variables. Moon in waning gibbous. Latitude 57. The variable of intent. "Top right quadrant," she instructed, her voice clinical. "Coordinates 7, 3, then drop to the lower left, vector 9. Draco moved. He took the silver knife, the same one he had used at the bridge, and sliced his palm again, reopening the wound she had healed. Fresh blood welled up, bright and horrifyingly red against the black stone. He pressed his bleeding hand against the wall at the coordinates she whispered. Sizzle. The obsidian drank the blood. The stone groaned, a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. A hairline fracture appeared in the smooth surface, glowing with a sickly green light. "Next," he gritted out, sweat beading on his forehead. "Center." prime meridian. Hold for 3 seconds. He obeyed. He pressed his palm flat. The stone shuddered. "Last one," Hermione said, watching the magic swirl. "Bottom right, but it's unstable. You have to be fast." Draco lunged for the spot. He pressed his hand down. The wall didn't just open, it dissolved. The black glass melted away like water, revealing a yawning, cavernous hallway that smelled of stale air and centuries of silence. Draco stumbled back, clutching his hand to his chest. He swayed, his knees buckling. Hermione caught him. It was a reflex. She grabbed his arm to keep him from hitting the ground. For a second, they were close again. She could smell the metallic tang of his blood and the fear coming off him in waves. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and vulnerable. "We're in," he breathed. "Granger, we—" He reached for her face with his clean hand, a gesture of shared victory, of relief. Hermione recoiled as if he had burned her. She shoved him back, hard. Draco stumbled, catching his balance against the cold wall of the entrance. He looked at her, stunned. The hurt in his eyes was immediate and raw. "Hermione!" "Don't," she hissed, her wand snapping up to point directly at his chest. "Don't touch me. Don't look at me like we're a team. Just get inside." "What is wrong with you?" His voice rose, cracking with frustration. "I just opened the damn door. I'm bleeding for this. What did I do?" "You know what you did," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "She trusts me. The path is open." Does that sound familiar, Malfoy? The colour drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I heard you," she continued, stepping closer, the tip of her wand glowing with a threatening red light. "Last night, outside the bothy, I heard your report. I heard your orders." Draco closed his mouth. He didn't deny it. He didn't scream that she was wrong. He just stared at her, a profound, crushing sadness settling over his features. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. "Isn't it?" She laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You're delivering me to them. I'm the price for your mother, aren't I? I open the keep, I get the artifact, and then you hand me over to the Dark Lord wrapped in a bow." "No," he said. He took a step toward her, disregarding the wand. "Hermione, listen to me. I had to—" "Stop!" She slashed her wand through the air. A curse, a stinging hex, hit the ground at his feet, shattering the rock. "If you take one more step, I will stun you. I will bind you, and I will leave you here." She was hyperventilating, the betrayal feeling like a physical wound in her chest. "I trusted you. I felt sorry for you. I thought you were changing." "I am," he pleaded. "I am changing because of you. The call, it was a stall. I had to make them believe I was still theirs. If they knew I had turned, they would kill my mother instantly. I had to buy us time." "Lies," she spat. "It's always lies with you. Manipulation. You're a Malfoy. It's in your blood, just like this cursed place." She gestured to the dark hallway of the keep. "Get up. Walk. You're going to help me find the amplifier. And then, if you try anything at all, I will kill you, Draco. I swear on Harry's life, I will kill you." Draco looked at her. He saw the tears standing in her eyes, the trembling of her hand, the absolute devastation in her face. He realized then that he had broken something that couldn't be fixed with a spell. He slowly raised his hands in surrender. His face hardened, the mask sliding back into place, but this time it was brittle, cracked. "Fine," he said, his voice void of emotion. You want a prisoner? You have one. After you, Warden." He gestured into the darkness. Hermione wiped her eyes angrily with her sleeve. She kept her wand trained on him as she maneuvered around him to take the lead. She couldn't trust him behind her. Not anymore. She stepped into the Obsidian Keep. The atmosphere inside was heavy, crushing. The air was dead. The floor was polished black stone that reflected their silhouettes like ghosts. Torches flared to life as they passed, burning with a blue, cold flame that offered no warmth. They walked down the main corridor. Statues of Malfoy ancestors lined the walls, their stone eyes watching judgmentally. The silence was absolute, save for the echo of their footsteps. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every flicker of the torchlight looked like a spell. Hermione's mind was racing. He's a double agent, or is that just another lie? The doubt was agonizing. Part of her wanted to believe him. Part of her wanted to scream at him, but she couldn't afford a breakdown. Not here. "The vault is down," Draco said from behind her. His voice was hollow. 3 levels. The stairs are trapped. I see them." They reached a spiraling staircase made of floating obsidian slabs suspended over a dark void. There were no railings. "The 3rd step is an illusion," Draco warned. "Step over it." Hermione hesitated. She had to trust his knowledge of the keep, even if she didn't trust him. "Go first," she commanded. Draco stepped onto the floating stairs. He moved with a grim determination, testing each slab before committing his weight. Hermione followed, keeping 3 steps between them, her wand never wavering from his back. They descended into the belly of the mountain. The air grew colder. A low whispering sound began to fill the space, the voices of the keep murmuring in a language Hermione didn't understand. Parcel tongue? No. Older. "We're getting close," Draco said. "Can you feel it?" "I feel the dark magic," she replied, tight-lipped. "It's not just dark magic," he said, pausing on a landing. He turned to look up at her. In the blue torchlight, he looked like a prince of the underworld, beautiful, tragic, and dangerous. "It's regret. This place was built on regret. Armand Malfoy locked his power away because he was afraid of what he would do with it. He was afraid he would destroy the one thing he loved." He looked at her pointedly. "Fear makes us do terrible things, Granger. It makes us lie to the people we want to protect." "Save the speeches for your trial," Hermione said, though her voice wavered. Suddenly, the keep shuddered. The whispering voices screamed. "Get down!" Draco yelled. He threw himself backwards up the stairs, tackling Hermione. A beam of violet light shot from the darkness below, obliterating the step where she had been standing a second ago. They crashed onto the landing above, Draco taking the brunt of the impact. He rolled, shielding her body with his own, his arms wrapping tight around her head. Debris rained down on them. The keep was waking up, and it wasn't happy. Draco lifted his head, breathless. He was on top of her again, just like in the forest. But this time, there was no tenderness. There was only desperate survival. "Are you hit?" he demanded, scanning her frantically. "Get off me!" Hermione shoved him, scrambling out from under him. She backed away, wand raised, heart pounding. "What was that?" "The Guardian," Draco said, standing up and wiping blood from a cut on his cheek. He looked down into the darkness where the violet light had come from. "It knows we're here, and it knows we're at war with each other." He looked at her, his grey eyes piercing. "The keep feeds on conflict, Hermione. If we go down there hating each other, it will kill us both. You have to trust me, just for the next hour. Please." Hermione looked at the destroyed staircase, then at Draco. He was bleeding, exhausted, and pleading. The seesaw trembled. She hated him. She loved him. She didn't know which was true anymore. "I don't trust you," she whispered, the truth hanging in the air like smoke. "But I don't want to die. That will have to do." He held out his hand, not to take hers, but to signal readiness. "Together?" he asked, the words sounding like a curse. Hermione tightened her grip on her wand. She stepped up beside him, shoulder to shoulder, but miles apart. "Together," she lied. They turned to face the dark. The darkness of the Obsidian Keep was not simply an absence of light. It was a physical weight, a suffocating velvet that pressed against their eardrums and filled their lungs with the taste of ozone and ancient dust. They descended the spiral staircase into the belly of the mountain, the violet afterglow of the Guardian's warning blast still searing their retinas. Hermione moved with mechanical precision, her wand raised, her senses stretched to their breaking point. Behind her, Draco was a silent spectre. She could hear his breathing, ragged, wet, painful, but she refused to turn around. If she looked at him, she would see the blood seeping through his shirt. If she looked at him, she might remember the feeling of his lips on hers in the bothy, and that memory was a weakness she could not afford. "He is a weapon," she told herself, the thought a mantra to keep the tears at bay. "He is a key, nothing more." But the keep knew better. The staircase ended abruptly in a vast circular chamber. The floor was a mirror of polished black stone, reflecting the vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadow. In the center, suspended in a column of thrumming, unstable magic, floated the amplifier. It looked deceptively simple, a crystalline polyhedron pulsing with a soft, rhythmic white light. "Don't step on the floor," Draco rasped. He leaned heavily against the archway, his face grey, sweat cutting tracks through the grime on his skin. "It's liquid obsidian. It responds to emotional volatility." Hermione paused, her toe inches from the black surface. She looked at the amplifier, then back at Draco. "How do we cross?" "We don't cross," he said, coughing into his fist. "We pull it to us. But the anchor is sentient." As if summoned by his words, the shadows in the room coalesced. The air temperature plummeted. From the liquid floor, shapes began to rise. Viscous, dripping figures made of black glass and nightmare. They didn't have faces, but they had forms. One looked like a woman with wild, curly hair, lying broken on the floor. The other looked like a tall man with a pale, pointed face, brandishing a wand with a green light at the tip. Hermione gasped, stumbling back. The keep was manifesting their deepest fears. It was showing them the ending they were both running toward. "Ignore them!" Draco shouted, pushing himself off the wall. He stumbled to her side, his wand drawn. "It's a psychological defense. Focus on the crystal." "I can't." Hermione's voice cracked. She stared at the glass figure of herself, dead at Draco's feet. "Is that what you promised them? Is that the price?" "Damn it, Hermione." Draco grabbed her arm, his grip desperate. "I never promised them anything but lies. Look at me." But before she could look, the glass figure of Draco lunged. It moved with terrifying speed, a silent blur of obsidian. Hermione cast a protego, but the glass shattered her shield like sugar. The impact threw her backward, skidding across the stone entrance. Confringo! Draco screamed. His curse hit the glass doppelganger, exploding it into 1,000 shards. But the shards didn't fall. They hovered in the air, turning toward him, sharpening into needles. "The keep feeds on conflict!" Draco roared, shielding his head as the glass storm rained down on him. "As long as you doubt me, it gets stronger. You have to let it go." "How can I?" Hermione scrambled up, firing a stream of stunning spells at the reforming shapes. "I heard you. The path is open. You sold me out. I bought you a future." Draco dropped his shield. He didn't fire at the monsters. He turned his back on the deadly swirling glass and faced her. He stood there, arms wide open, defenseless, offering his chest to her wand and his back to the keep's fury. "Legilimens me," he commanded. Hermione froze. "What?" "Do it!" he screamed, his voice raw with panic. Behind him, the glass figure of the Death Eater was raising its wand again. "Look inside my head. See the truth. If you don't trust me, we die here. Do it!" The desperation in his eyes was absolute. It wasn't the look of a traitor. It was the look of a man laying his soul on an anvil. Hermione didn't think. She raised her wand, pointing it directly between his eyes. Legilimens. The world dissolved. She was pulled into the hurricane of Draco Malfoy's mind. It wasn't the orderly, occluded fortress she expected. It was a ruin, battered by fear and guilt. Flash. The bothy last night. Draco standing in the rain, the mist swirling. "She trusts me," he says to the Snatcher leader. But Hermione feels the emotion underneath the words. It is nausea. It is terror. Inner monologue. "They are tracking the wand. If I don't report in, they'll send the elite squad. They'll kill her. I have to make them think I'm bringing her in. I have to get her to the keep. Once we have the amplifier, I can break the trace. I can get her out." Flash. Draco looking at her sleeping form on the pallet. Inner monologue. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You'll hate me for this, but at least you'll be alive to hate me." Flash. Older memories. 3rd year. Punching him. Emotion. Admiration. No. Envy. She is everything he isn't. Brave. Good. Flash. The manner. Bellatrix torturing her. Emotion. Agony. He is screaming inside his own head. He wants to die rather than watch. He tries to look away, but he can't. He vows in that moment that if he ever has the power, he will burn the world to stop it from happening again. The connection snapped. Hermione gasped, returning to her body. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Draco. He was still standing there, breathing hard, his eyes searching hers for a verdict. Behind him, the obsidian giant raised a massive spiked fist. "Draco, move!" Hermione didn't cast a shield. She didn't cast an attack. She threw herself forward, bridging the distance between them, and slammed her hand onto his chest, right over his heart. Unitas. It was an obscure spell, old magic she had read about in the restricted section, a bond of synchronization. The effect was instantaneous. A pulse of golden light exploded from where they touched. It wasn't just magic, it was them. Her Gryffindor fire and his Slytherin ice. Her righteous anger and his desperate survival instinct. The golden shockwave hit the obsidian monsters. They didn't shatter, they melted. The darkness of the room was pushed back by the blinding brilliance of their combined magical cores. Draco gasped, his eyes widening as he felt the surge of her power flow into him. He didn't pull away. He covered her hand with his own, interlacing their fingers, locking the circuit. "Together," he whispered. "This time a promise, not a curse." "Together," she echoed. They turned to face the amplifier. "On 3, Hermione said, her voice steady, amplified by his strength. "We have to destabilize the containment field." "I'll hold the structure," Draco said, his mind moving in perfect tandem with hers. He knew what she needed before she said it. "You extract the core. 1, 2, 3. Draco slashed his wand upward. A dome of silver light erupted around the central pillar, holding back the crushing weight of the keep's defensive wards. He groaned, the strain visible in the corded muscles of his neck. Hermione stepped into the circle. She reached out with her wand, weaving a complex pattern of arithmancy equations into the air. She wasn't just solving a puzzle, she was conducting a symphony. And Draco was the instrument. She could feel his pain, the burn in his arm, the exhaustion in his legs. And he could feel her fear, the terror of failure, the weight of the war. But instead of weakening them, the shared sensation grounded them. "I have you," his voice echoed in her mind, clear and strong. "Don't look back. Just reach." Hermione extended her free hand toward the pulsing crystal. The magic bit at her fingers, hot and angry. "It's rejecting me," she cried out. "It wants blood," Draco shouted. "It's a Malfoy heirlooms." He didn't let go of the shield. Instead, he bit down on his own lip, hard enough to draw blood, and spat the crimson onto the floor of the circle. "Take it!" he roared at the keep. "I am the blood. She is the will. Yield!" The keep shuddered. The black stone groaned in submission. The containment field shattered with the sound of breaking glass. The amplifier dropped. Hermione lunged, catching the crystal before it hit the ground. Silence. The monsters were gone. The violet light was gone. The room was just a cold, dark cave. Hermione stood there, clutching the warm, humming artifact to her chest. She was trembling violently. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her hollow. She turned slowly. Draco was on his knees. The shield had drained him. He was leaning forward, his hands braced on the floor, head hanging low. "Draco!" She ran to him, dropping to her knees beside him. She placed the amplifier on the ground and grabbed his shoulders. "Draco, look at me. Are you okay?" He lifted his head. He looked wrecked. His skin was the color of old parchment, his eyes bruised with fatigue. But there was a light in them that hadn't been there before. "You saw," he whispered. It wasn't a question. "I saw," she choked out, brushing the hair from his sweat-slicked forehead. "I saw everything. The manor, the call. You were trying to save me." "Always," he croaked. He tried to smile, but it turned into a grimace of pain. He coughed, and a speck of blood hit his chin. "Since 4th year, I just wasn't brave enough to do it properly. You were brave enough today." Hermione looked at his injured arm. The bandage was soaked through again. She looked at his face, stripped of all defenses. The anger that had fueled her for days was gone, leaving only a profound, aching tenderness. She didn't care about the war in that moment. She didn't care about Voldemort. "We have the amplifier," she said softly. "We can go home." Draco shook his head weakly. "Not yet. The keep, it doesn't let you leave just because you won." A low rumble started deep in the earth. Dust began to fall from the ceiling. "It's collapsing," Draco said, struggling to stand. He swayed, and Hermione wrapped her arm around his waist, hauling him up. "It was a one-way ticket, Granger. Armand didn't want anyone taking this out. "Then we break out," Hermione said fiercely. She grabbed the amplifier with her free hand and shoved it into her beaded bag. She gripped Draco tighter. "We have the wand. We have the artifact. And we have each other. That's the variable the Keep didn't account for." Draco looked at her, and for the first time, he really smiled. It was a small, broken thing, but it reached his eyes. "You really are the brightest witch of your age," he murmured. "Shut up and run, Malfoy." They scrambled toward the stairs as the ceiling began to cave in. Giant slabs of obsidian crashed down behind them, chasing their heels. They weren't fighting the enemy anymore. They weren't fighting each other. They were two halves of a whole, running for the light. Hermione felt his magic humming against hers, a constant, reassuring presence in the back of her mind. Unitas. The spell hadn't faded. She realized then that it might never fade. They reached the top of the stairs, the entrance to the outer world visible as a slit of grey light. "Jump!" Draco yelled. They threw themselves out of the Keep's maw just as the entrance slammed shut, sealing the darkness forever. They landed hard on the granite plateau, rolling in the snow. They lay there, tangled together, chests heaving, staring up at the bruised sky. They were alive. Hermione turned her head. Draco was already looking at her. He reached out, his hand shaking, and found hers in the snow. He squeezed. "We did it," he whispered, sounding amazed. "We did," she replied. She squeezed back, and in the silence of the mountain, it felt like an oath. The doubt was gone. The betrayal was a ghost. All that was left was the heat of his hand in hers, and the terrifying, wonderful certainty that she would never let go. The silence on the plateau was absolute, a stark, ringing void that felt louder than the collapsing mountain had moments before. The Obsidian Keep was gone, sealed behind a wall of impenetrable granite, leaving no trace of the horrors or the revelations within. Hermione lay in the snow, staring up at the sky where the storm clouds were finally beginning to fracture, revealing veins of pale winter starlight. Beside her, Draco was a heavy, warm weight, his breathing ragged but steady. Their hands were still clasped, burying a knot of heat into the frozen ground between them. She turned her head. Draco's eyes were closed. His skin was the color of moonlight, translucent and bruised. The bandage on his hand was soaked through again, a dark bloom against the white snow. But the tension that had defined him for days, the rigid, defensive posture of a cornered animal, had finally snapped. "We need to move," she whispered, though the thought of standing up felt impossible. "Hypothermia." Draco's eyes cracked open. They were dull, the grey clouded with exhaustion, but they found hers immediately. "You're bossy, even when you're half dead, Granger." "It's a talent," she murmured, squeezing his hand. "Can you stand?" "Ask me in a minute." He didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he pulled it toward him, pressing her knuckles against his chest, right over his heart. Through the layers of his ruined coat and the lingering hum of the Unitas spell, she could feel the slow, heavy thud of his life beating against her palm. It was a rhythm of survival. "I didn't think we'd make it," he confessed, his voice rough. "The math, the probability was 0. "We changed the variables," Hermione said softly. With a groan of effort that was painful to hear, Draco rolled onto his side and pushed himself up. He swayed, his equilibrium shot, and Hermione was there instantly, her shoulder under his arm, taking his weight. "The extraction point," she said, gritting her teeth against the ache in her own muscles. "It's a mile down the ridge. There's a shepherd's hut. We can wait for the dawn portkey there." "A mile," Draco repeated, looking at the snowy expanse. Joy. The walk was a blur of pain and perseverance. They moved as a single, three-legged entity, stumbling over hidden rocks and sliding on patches of ice. The wind had died down, but the cold was biting, settling deep into their bones. When they finally reached the hut, it was little more than a pile of stones with a thatched roof. But to Hermione, it looked like the finest manor in Wiltshire. She kicked the door open and guided Draco to a pile of dry straw in the corner. He collapsed onto it, his head falling back against the rough stone wall, his eyes slipping shut. Hermione didn't rest. She couldn't. Not yet. She cast bluebell flames into a rusted iron bucket in the center of the room, the blue light casting long spectral shadows. She sealed the cracks in the walls with a quick impervious. She melted snow in a conjured cup. Only then did she kneel beside him. "Draco," she whispered, touching his knee. "Drink." He drank the water greedily, his hands shaking so hard she had to hold the cup for him. When he finished, he slumped back, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You should sleep," he said. "I need to check your arm first. The necrotic curse." "It stopped," he cut in. He lifted his left arm. The bandage was bloody, yes, but the black veins that had been crawling up his skin earlier were gone. The skin around the wound was angry and red, but it was just a wound now. The keep, it took the payment. The debt is paid. Hermione let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since they crossed the bridge. She carefully unwrapped the sodden linen, vanishing it with a flick of her wand, and began to clean the cut with the last of her dittany. Her fingers were gentle, reverent. She traced the line of the scar, then moved lower, her thumb brushing over the faded ink of the dark mark. Draco flinched, trying to pull his arm back. "Don't! Stop it!" she said firm, holding his wrist. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I saw your mind, Draco. I know what this means to you now. It's not a badge of honor. It's a brand of slavery." "It's a target," he corrected bitterly. "When we get back, when you give the order the amplifier, I'm done. They'll throw me in Azkaban, or Potter will inadvertently let slip where I am, and the Dark Lord will finish what he started." "No," Hermione said. The word was absolute. Draco let out a dry laugh. "You can't stop them, Hermione. You're a hero, but you're not the law." "I am the handler," she said, her voice fierce. She finished bandaging his hand and sat back on her heels, refusing to break eye contact. "I am the one who brought you in. I am the one who holds the key to the amplifier. Without me, they can't use it. And I will not unlock it unless Kingsley guarantees your safety, and your mother's." Draco stared at her. The blue firelight danced in his eyes, reflecting a mixture of shock and awe. "You would blackmail the Order of the Phoenix? For me?" "I would do what is right," she said stubbornly. "You saved my life today. You saved the war effort. I don't leave my partners behind." Partners. The word hung in the small, cold room, heavy with implication. Draco slowly sat up, wincing as his muscles protested. He leaned forward until his face was level with hers. The air between them shifted, thickening with the same magnetic pull she had felt in the forest, but deeper now. heavier. It was no longer the tension of enemies, but the gravity of two stars colliding. "Is that what we are?" he whispered. "Partners?" Hermione looked at his mouth, then back to his eyes. "We're not enemies. Not anymore." "No," he agreed, his voice dropping to a husky murmur. "We're certainly not that." He reached out with his good hand, the right one, and cupped her face. His fingers were cold, rough with dirt, but his touch was incredibly tender. He traced the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of soot. Hermione leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. The exhaustion, the fear, the adrenaline, it all seemed to bleed away, leaving only this warmth. "You saw me," he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. "Inside the keep, you saw the worst parts of me, the cowardice, the fear." "I saw the bravery," she countered, opening her eyes. They were inches apart. "I saw a boy who was terrified, but did the right thing anyway. That's not cowardice, Draco. That's the only kind of courage that matters." Draco let out a shaky breath. He looked at her as if she were the only source of light in the world. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his vulnerability raw and open. "I don't know how to be good. I've spent my whole life learning how to survive, not how to live." "We'll figure it out," Hermione whispered. "We have time." "Do we?" "Yes." He searched her face for a moment longer, looking for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he closed the gap. The kiss was nothing like the one in the bothy. That had been desperate, feverish, a clash of fears. This was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question asked and answered in the soft pressure of lips. Draco kissed her as if she was something fragile and precious, something he was terrified of breaking. One hand tangled in the back of her messy curls, holding her steady, while the other kept caressing her cheek. Hermione made a soft sound in her throat, her hands finding purchase on his shoulders, pulling him closer. She tasted the salt of his skin, the metallic tang of magic, and the sweetness of relief. It was the taste of a promise kept. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, the silence in the hut wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Draco rested his forehead against hers again, his eyes closed. "Granger, if we survive this war, if we actually win." "When we win," she corrected. He huffed a small laugh, the sound vibrating against her skin. "When we win, I'm going to take you to a library. A real one. Not that dusty tomb at Hogwarts. The Bibliothèque in Paris. And I'm going to buy you coffee. And I'm going to sit there and watch you read for as long as you like." Hermione smiled, tears pricking her eyes. It was such a mundane, simple fantasy. It was perfect. "I take milk and no sugar." "I know," he whispered. "I remember." Dawn arrived not with a burst of sun, but with a gradual lightening of the grey sky outside the cracks in the stone. The magical alarm Hermione had set buzzed softly against her wrist. She stirred, lifting her head from where it had been resting on Draco's shoulder. They had fallen asleep sitting up, huddled together for warmth under her cloak. "Time?" Draco mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. 5 minutes to the portkey window," she said, sitting up and stretching. Her body ached, but it was a good ache, the ache of being alive. She stood and offered him a hand. Draco took it. He stood up, steadying himself. He looked better, still pale, still battered, but the haunted look in his eyes had receded. He looked like a man who had faced his demons and walked away. They gathered their few belongings. Hermione checked the amplifier in her bag one last time. It hummed contentedly, a dormant weapon ready to end a war. They walked out of the hut into the biting morning air. The sun was just cresting the peaks of the highlands, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. It was breathtakingly beautiful. Draco stood beside her, looking out at the horizon. He adjusted the collar of his coat, the old arrogance gone, replaced by a quiet stoicism. "They'll be waiting," he said. "Potter, Shacklebolt, the Auras." "Let them wait," Hermione said. She turned to him. "You're with me." Draco looked down at her. A gust of wind blew a lock of platinum hair into his eyes, and he brushed it away impatiently. He looked at her with a clarity that stopped her heart. "I'm with you," he repeated. "Always." He reached out and took her hand. He didn't check to see if anyone was watching. He didn't care about the optics or the politics or the blood status. He laced his fingers through hers, gripping tight. Hermione squeezed back. She felt the call of the port key, an old tin can lying in the snow a few yards away, beginning to vibrate. "Ready?" she asked. Draco looked at the tin can, then back at the sunrise, and finally at her. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of old-world chivalry that felt entirely new. "Ready," he said. They stepped forward together, two broken pieces of a fractured world, fused by gold and fire, walking into the light to finish the war they had started. And as the port key jerked them away from the mountain, spinning them into the void, Hermione knew one thing for certain. Whatever darkness lay ahead, she would not be facing it alone. The seesaw had stopped. They were balanced.
Hello, dear friends. Thank you for listening to this story. Writing this story was a very emotional journey for me. We all know Draco and Hermione are enemies. They are like fire and ice. But I wanted to ask a simple question. What happens when the ice begins to melt? This story is not just about magic or fighting, it is about the war inside our hearts. Draco feels he is broken. He thinks he is a dark forever, but Hermione, she becomes his light. I wanted to show that trust is hard. Trusting your enemy is terrifying. But sometimes the person you think you hate is the only one who can save you. I hope you felt the cold on the mountain and the warmth of their hands. I hope you felt that even broken people can find love. Thank you for being here with me. See you in the next story.